protocols as well as products. So jumping into the beginning about what really is a blockchain. And believe it or not, this whole idea was originated about 1991, that's 30 years ago now, by two gentlemen, Stuart Hafer and Scott Stornetta. And these two gentlemen came up with this idea about this whole process about where documents, files, and just data and information could be processed without being tampered with. And this is done using cryptography and distributed computing power. So you can think of computing power as the energy that you're using to run, whether it's your computer, your smartphone, or pretty much any type of technology in general. In essence, a blockchain, as you guys are very familiar as accountants, it is a ledger of data. So when you go and you look at a blockchain, which we will look at in a little bit, it is just a clean sheet of data. It's just all information. That's all a blockchain really is. And the blocks within this blockchain are all interconnected. And the block is what actually holds all of that data, all of that information. And the chain is essentially the public database where it connects all of these different types of blocks. And as you guys are probably familiar with, the first real-world application of blockchain didn't actually come until about 20 years later, after Stuart and Scott came out with this idea. And this was Bitcoin and the Bitcoin protocol. And that was launched back in 2009, about 10 years ago. So let me ask you guys, who here has actually heard of Bitcoin or actually owns Bitcoin?
First, but not second.
It's actually more than I expected. Well, that's awesome. So, as many of you might be familiar with, the guy who actually created Bitcoin and the Bitcoin white paper, no one actually knows who this guy is. He has created an asset economy that is currently valued over $100 billion, and no one knows who created it. It goes by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. Don't know who he is. And the code for this project and this software was open sourced, and this white paper was originally released back in October of 2008. And the first block on this Bitcoin network launched on January 3rd, 2009. And the network was allowed to officially start functioning, so pretty much any people around the globe were able to start to be a part of this network about 6 days later on January 9th, 2009. All of these transactions that are done on this network are executed and verified by these things called nodes or miners, which we will talk a little bit about later. And every single one of these transactions that are executed on this network, they are all stored on a publicly viewed distributed ledger, which is called a blockchain. So that is the underlying technology of this magical internet money that everyone is sort of talking about or may have heard about. So let's look about what is actually a part of a transaction within a blockchain. So on the right-hand side, we have an example of what looks like, or what you will find as a part of the Ethereum blockchain. So Ethereum is the second largest blockchain network in the world. Bitcoin is currently the largest. So on the right-hand side, there's about 7 different numbers. At the top, you can see the little number 1, and that is right next to what is called a transaction hash. A transaction hash is what you get, that is an output from all of these different data points. So all of your data points you can actually find right below it, whether it is a timestamp, so it shows when a transaction occurs or when it is executed. You can also find out the value with which a transaction holds. So you can see how much is being sent from one party to the next. You can see where that money is being sent from and who it is being sent to. and that is all generated, all of these different types of inputs are generated, sort of like a mathematical equation, and generated to create this transaction hash. So every single transaction has its own transaction hash. So then following right below that, you have the block height. So a block height is where a transaction occurs within the blockchain. So in this one, it is 4,169,059. And that is how many blocks have occurred since the first block on this blockchain network. So the Genesis block, as I mentioned before, is the first block within a blockchain. You can think of it similar to, in religion, especially in Catholicism, Christianity, and Judaism, with the Genesis book of the Bible. That is the first book that was created. And the Genesis block is essentially the first block of a network. So then every single block after that holds all of these different types of transaction hashes. Then we can also see the timestamp. So you can see exactly when a transaction occurred. For this one, it occurred in August of 2017 on the 17th. And then you can also see who it is going from, who it is going to. You can see the value with which that transaction holds. So in this case, there was about $1,500 that was being transacted. And then you can also see the fee associated with that transaction, which we will talk a little bit about later with how a fee is associated with a transaction. And then on the left-hand side, so it says transaction view information about a Bitcoin transaction. So this is what you will see typically for a Bitcoin transaction block. Oh. And we're back in business. So on the left-hand side, we also have a transaction ID. So that is very similar to a transaction hash. It is essentially the same thing. You have all of these different inputs, whether it is the person sending a value, the person receiving it. You also have the value with which is being transacted and the fee that you are using to send that transaction. And all of these different things are being put into place to create that transaction ID or transaction hash. So now we're going to talk about how a fee works within these networks. As I mentioned before, with the two gentlemen who created this whole idea, there has to be a reward incentivization and be able to essentially power these networks using distributed computing power. So the way that works is you can have all of these different types of people anywhere around the world being part of these distributed networks and these, I guess, going and doing very complicated computer algorithms and running them, whether it's on a CPU or a GPU. A GPU is a gaming processor unit, so I don't know if you guys play any video games or have any family members who do that, but most likely they probably have a GPU. And they can go and they can mine and be a part of a blockchain network. And you can actually be rewarded for doing so. And when you're making a transaction fee, it's very different than how it functions with a legacy system. So for example, when I'm going and sending money in a typical manner, you have to do it through a wire transfer, or whether it's an ACH transfer if it's within the United States. And you can do all of these different types of just monetary transactions, and they typically have to go through a bank. And let's say, for example, I pull out my wallet. I don't know if I actually have any money in my wallet. All right, I got 20 bucks. So I have $20 in my wallet, and I wanted to go and give it to Susan sitting in the front row. And all of you guys are seeing that, and I have $20, I give her $20. You guys can all see that. And you guys can all say, all right, Mark gave her $20. That's pretty simple, okay? Like, you guys can all see that, you can verify that. She now has $20. When you're doing this digitally, and you're doing this online, whether it's from within a room or to someone anywhere around the globe, the process can get a little bit complicated. So when you're making that transaction, how can you actually verify that money is going from, or just anything in general is going from point A to point B, whether it is money or just any type of asset in general? And that is how a blockchain can be beneficial, because you don't actually have to have a central party being able to verify that. You can use third-party people or just anyone in general within a network to be able to verify that. And that's where a miner comes in. So it's not a coal miner. So when you're thinking of a miner, you're probably thinking about the people going down and underground and digging up coal.
Clean coal.
What is it?
Cleaning coal.
Cleaning coal. Sorry, I'm not very familiar with it. And these people are operating as miners within this network. And they are the ones who are verifying and executing those transactions using computing power. So it doesn't matter really what you're sending. It can be for food, it can be to send money to loved ones overseas, it can be to send property rights to someone anywhere around the globe. It can be virtually anything. It's just data. You're sending data from point A to point B. And you are able to do that using a blockchain. And so that's where you are able to essentially pay this network, whether it's people in this room or anyone around the globe, can then go and be rewarded for verifying those transactions. And there's a sort of a cool way that you can incentivize people to do that. So for example, on the right-hand side, there is an example where someone didn't actually pay enough of a fee to the network to execute a transaction. So that money obviously goes right back to you, but that fee that you spent just goes to the network. So people are still paid for trying to validate that transaction, but you didn't pay them enough. So now we're going to talk a little bit about public key cryptography. Now, if you're probably thinking about cryptography, it probably reminds you a little bit about hieroglyphics. And probably the first time I read about cryptography, I sort of felt the same way, because it's very similar. You're looking at a bunch of letters and numbers that mean absolutely nothing. It's just a bunch of jumbled letters and numbers. So when you're dealing with public key cryptography, you're probably very familiar. For those of you who have created or are familiar somewhat with Bitcoin or any type of digital currency, when you're creating a wallet, you are given both a public key and a private key. So your public key is sort of your public-facing, sort of your identity, or what allows you to interact with different types of information, so you can receive data as well as sending information. And your private key is what allows you to access all of that information. So let's say, for example, I have a wallet and I have whatever type of information or value is in that wallet. No one can access that information without having the single private key for that wallet. And what you can do with a private key and a public key is you can encrypt and decrypt information. And so that's this whole idea about how you can deal with cryptography. So when you're going and let's say, for example, you are sending a file, or let's say, for example, you're authenticating yourself to make a transaction. There is a way that you can sign off using your key to be able to encrypt that information, and then it can then be decrypted using a private key. So now, smart contracts. These are probably my favorite topic to talk about, especially in blockchain, and how it deals with automation. So I don't know how many of you guys deal with lawyers, or just, I guess, legal documents in general. But on the left-hand side, we have, I guess, a typical contract and legal binding contract. And then comparing to it, right next to it, is, I guess, this coded contract that you can create and create just like typing different types of code within it. One of the very popular coding languages for that is Solidity and Go. And the idea behind a smart contract allows you to automate and create different types of rule sets for solutions to be executed. So for example, I was talking to the gentleman over here who deals with real estate, and real estate is one of the good examples that you can give with smart contract automation. So when you're dealing with a smart contract, or in this example I'm going to give about a peer-to-peer marketplace, so a marketplace where you can have buyers and sellers of pretty much any good, but in this case we're going to talk about real estate or just property in general. And you can have, as you can see, an underlying asset. In this case we're just going to use a house. So here in McLean, Virginia, I'm going to say there's a person trying to sell a house for $200,000. That's a steal around here. And okay, you're trying to sell your house for $200,000. That's probably going to sell pretty quick. And then we have all of these different types of buyers. And you are going to set your selling price for $200,000, and you can have all of the property rights associated with that this property to be transferred as soon as that payment is executed. So then you have all of these different types of buyers. Let's say we have someone who is willing to purchase it for $190,000. The person can go and manually change that so they can receive $190,000. But then we have this other person who comes in and they say, I'll buy it for $200,000. That payment can be immediately executed so that that value, whatever it might be in whatever form of digital currency, can be immediately sent over to the person selling the property. And those property rights can then be sent immediately over to the person buying that property. So it's an instant change of value between one person and the next. And it doesn't really rely on a central party to enable that. So now we want to talk a little bit about, sure.
If you could take a step back there.
Yeah.
I understand we can currently send bitcoins to one another.
Correct.
We can currently, I don't know that there's any,
and I don't know that there's any way to send cash to one another.
Correct.
Other than by using a bank. So the technology to send bitcoins or other cyber currency is available. Is there currently a legal construct to transfer property? I'm not aware of any yet.
Yes.
So how's that done? Could you build out on that a little bit?
Sure. Sure. So there are a few different types of organizations that are actually trying to get into this. Obviously, many of them are startups. And they are trying to build out these types of peer-to-peer marketplaces, whether it's for just goods and services or for real estate or pretty much anything in general. And for the real estate business, obviously there are a bunch of different types of hoops that you have to go through for legal and signing off on different types of things. This is just sort of an example to say where you have a underlying asset that can be immediately sent to someone and receive some type of value, whether it is a currency that is pegged one-to-one to a fiat currency, whether it's like the USD, the Euro, or any other currency out there, or whether it's just a typical type of cryptocurrency, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. And obviously there are different types of things that you have to go through to be able to enable that. I was just trying to express that just for allowing it to be expressed on a simple manner. So showing how something can be sent from one person to the other, whether it's a currency, whether it's just data, information, value, or anything like that. It doesn't just have to be cryptocurrency, cyber currency, or anything like that. It can be pretty much anything that, whether it's tokenized or whether it's just data or encrypted information that can be sent over, and people will pay for that information, whether it's a property right, whether it's IP, whether it is for a security, all of these different types of things. Or it can just be for going and mowing the lawn for somebody. You can agree on a payment for something, and once a payment is executed, that can be, or once a payment can be agreed on, that can be sent into what is called an escrow. So an escrow payment allows for someone to send money into a smart contract. So that allows when someone is able to verify that they have completed something, they can go and do that. The other person who is paying them can verify that, and that money can be immediately sent over. And that can be for $1, that can be for $1 million, $1 billion, anything. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I know, you know, when I've bought houses, you know, there's a stack of documents,
Yes.
you know, an inch or so high that I have to sign.
Correct.
So I'm assuming there'd be an escrow agent, like a title agent that is conveying a house, and one of them would have to have some type of facility to execute those documents, awaiting a transfer into escrow to actually make the legal conveyance of title.
Correct, and that is one of the things that you sort of have to go through. I'm just kind of saying it for simplicity's sake, just to say how you can have value going from one place to the other.
Okay.
Mark, do you have any examples of these types of smart contracts that maybe we would recognize? Or is there anyone out there today that maybe is like kind of a name that we would recognize using these smart contracts?
Using a smart contract,
Or is it still all very theoretical?
it's definitely not theoretical because it's already being used. They're already being developed and being implemented pretty much on a day-to-day basis. Pretty much on the decentralized app level. So for the most part, a lot of the smart contracts that you would probably be interacting with aren't necessarily being utilized in many first worlds. Usually they are being operated by people who are in developing countries and underdeveloped countries. So you can think of people who are doing different types of services for whatever it might be. It could be for cutting someone's hair, it could be for mowing a lawn, it could be for...
Is it Venmo?
You can think of a payment as Venmo, but a smart contract is not necessarily Venmo. So a smart contract is allowing you to make sure, so I'm going to give it in a much more basic term. So you can think of a smart contract as a set of rules. So a set of rules for something to follow. So you can
I
think
totally
of...
understand what it is. I think understanding the practicality of it, where it's used, helps to contextualize it.
Sure. So you can't, you can think about it like with like robotics and things like that. When you're dealing with a robot, you have it to operate in a certain function, and when you press a button, it'll do one thing, and it has to have that button to be able to do that. So for example, with a smart contract, if all of these needs aren't met, it is not able to go through. So for example, we built out a smart contract that allowed for once people made a certain amount of transactions, we would pay them for doing something. So you can think of doing micro tasks. So if you say, okay, like if you go and like all of these different things on social media, or you make a transaction on this application, or you interact with this application, we'll pay you to do that. And you are able to build that into code and allow for this code to essentially go through and see what is going on within an entire application.
So automatically monitor the compliance against
Correct.
the contract? And release it
Correct.
to them.
So it makes sure everything is being met before it can be executed.
I have a question. So maybe what would be helpful is, can you provide some examples of what the platform that this operates on? I think because if we understood this, I'm a process person. If
Okay.
we understood how you can do the transaction, not the outcome of it and all these different steps we run on, what do you need to be able to do this type of transaction in terms of a software application, do you have to buy a certain type of software? Do you have a certain type of computer? Do you have to buy a certain type of security key? Any kind of cryptography applications? What's involved to enable somebody to do a transaction in blockchain?
There can be a bunch of different ways, and I was actually going to talk about that a little bit in the next slide. And the way that that functions is whether you want to make a transaction on the Bitcoin network, whether it's the Ethereum network or pretty much any type of network, you have to have this currency that operates on that network. You also have these, they're called enterprise blockchains, whether it's R3, Corda, Hyperledger, Ethereum, Enterprise, they all operate as permissioned private blockchains, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And you essentially pay like millions of dollars to be able to build out a blockchain database where you don't really have to pay those types of gas fees. So a gas fee, or just a fee in general, is what you pay to make a transaction on any of these types of blockchains. So it's essentially a fee that you have to pay using this type of cryptocurrency or just digital currency in general to be able to execute any of those transactions. So you don't actually need to have a processing power or anything like that to actually be able to execute it. You just have to have like a mobile device or internet connection. I can go on my computer right now and send anything if I wanted to. You don't really necessarily need to have the computing power. You can be rewarded for using computing power and things like that to be able to, I guess, receive value for the energy and time that you're putting in to execute those transactions for other people. Does that make sense?
It's very generational. So I think
Yes.
like you're talking to us, and it's like, wow. I feel like the Jetsons have arrived.
Do you have a question?
Hi, Mark. I just got a comment.
Sure.
And I'm sure you're going to get to this later in your talk.
Mhm.
Speak up so the people in the back.
Do you want-
A lot of Bitcoin transactions, or most Bitcoin transactions, are done anonymously, and they're done by people who are nefarious. And you'll hear a lot about hackers who are stealing your data, no company names mentioned, who will hack your system, lock your system down,
And get
and
paid in
say,
Bitcoin.
we'll release your data if you'll pay us in Bitcoin.
Well, ask for ransom.
Right, so it's ransomware. So
Yeah, and that's actually sort of
Yeah.
the idea behind, and it's definitely not a good thing with like how Bitcoin really got a lot of its recognition when it first came out, because it was created by a lot of libertarians, whether you're a fan of it or not. I personally am not a libertarian by any means, but it's this idea behind these people trying to break away from, I guess, central governments and just financial power from, I guess, this higher authority. And there was this platform that was created back in, I believe it was 2012, and ran for about 18 months. It was called the Silk Road. And that was literally how Bitcoin got its name and how it got so prevalent within people all around the world. And a lot of people actually paid at that time for different types of transactions, whether it was for drugs or different types of nefarious things. And I mean, you can go back and you can verify all those things. I will say now really isn't used for that by any means. Cash is king. When you speak to pretty much, and there was a person who anonymously interviewed some of the largest drug dealers, and I thought that was really interesting. And they were asking them about how they use Bitcoin. And they were like, we don't use Bitcoin, we use cash. Because cash is the most anonymous transaction of wealth. Because when you're using Bitcoin, believe it or not, it is not anonymous. It's pseudo-anonymous. Because all of these different types of transactions are tied to an address. All of those addresses can be tracked. And that is something I'll be talking a little bit about later with AI and ML. And one of the big, I guess, hot topics with accounting, which is RPA, and how that can actually be used for auditing.
Mark, would you mind describing those three acronyms you just used?
AI and ML?
Mhm.
Okay.
And
So
RPA.
So AI stands for artificial intelligence, and then ML stands for machine learning. Yes, I want to connect to the internet. And then ML stands for machine learning. So artificial intelligence,
And the third one was RPA.
RPA, which is robotic process automation. And I'll talk a little bit more in depth about robotic process automation, but they're all sort of intertwined with one another. And the idea behind AI and ML, which is artificial intelligence and machine learning, is it's this emerging technology that allows you to go through and record all of these different types of data sets and get these additional data points that allow you to audit and verify pretty much any type of information. And when you're looking at any type of explorer, so like a blockchain explorer or blockchain network, you can go and see all of these types of transactions. And you can actually go and figure out where all of these transactions are going from, who they're going to, and you can actually connect a identity to some of these different types of transactions, believe it or not. And that's actually one of the things that my team is focused on is a decentralized identity, so building out different types of identity-driven solutions. And when you're dealing with all of these different types of products, you don't want to think about it as an anonymous transaction, because if you're thinking about it in that way, if you're obviously going and making different types of nefarious purchases and things like that, hopefully none of you are, you'll be caught very, very quickly. And there's already the tech out there that can allow you to get tracked down. So if you are doing that, don't. Be very careful. So let me see if this works. I'm sorry?
How do you become a minor?
How to become a miner? Okay.
And can minor intercept any kind of transactions and steal it, make it their own?
Sure. Yes. So to your second question, that is called a 51% attack. And that has actually never happened on any of the largest blockchains. So a 51% attack occurs when a single person or a group of people try and essentially take down an entire blockchain. So they bring about 51% of all of the computing power for that blockchain and are able to do what they want with that network. So they can take that money, they can send transactions to where they want, they can take money from other wallets, but it's never happened, mostly because it's so expensive to do it. And if you don't execute it, then you lose all of that money, which is an insane amount of money of what it's valued at right now. I believe someone was doing some math about a couple of weeks ago that I saw, and I believe it was over $100 billion that you would have to pay to be able to try to crack, whether it's like the Bitcoin blockchain. It's not easy. It's never been done. Will it occur? I don't know. That's sort of the idea behind calling a blockchain immutable. So is it possible to hack into a blockchain? Yes. Has it been done? It has been done to different types of blockchains. The reason is because there weren't enough people operating within that blockchain and operating as a miner. So when you want to become a miner, I could use my computer if I wanted to. I've used it before for mining. Obviously, you're not going to get pretty much any money, but you can go and you can purchase different types of, they're called rigs. So you can go and purchase these rigs and you can set them up. It's obviously not very easy to do so. And you can start to run different types of software on them that will allow you to then mine and execute transactions within a blockchain. Does that answer your question? Oops. Let's see if this works. Nope. All right, doing it the manual way. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of blockchains. So I've talked a little bit about some different buzzwords and things like that, and believe it or not, there are different kinds of blockchains. And oddly enough, none of these blockchains actually are able to communicate with one another. And that is actually one of the big things that people are trying to solve right now. So it's a term called an interoperable blockchain. So you can have the data and information from one blockchain being able to communicate with information from another blockchain. So So currently there are pretty much 4 different types of blockchains right now. There are a permissionless public blockchain, there is a permissioned public blockchain, a permissionless private blockchain, as well as a permissioned private blockchain. So we're going to start with the permissionless public blockchain. So I've talked a little bit about the first two, Bitcoin and Ethereum. The organization that I work with, which is called Hydro, we operate on top of Ethereum as it's called a layer 2. So you can have all of these different types of digital currencies. In our case, ours is Hydro, and they can operate on top of a main network. So a main network would be Bitcoin or Ethereum. And you can go and see all of the transactions within the Hydro network, which are all operating on top of Ethereum. And the idea behind a permissionless public blockchain is that anybody around the world can be a part of the network. So as I mentioned, if you want to become a miner, you can go and you can mine and be a part of the Bitcoin or Ethereum blockchain. And it's kind of cool because pretty much anyone can go and do it. It's free to do it. And all of the transactions, since it is a public blockchain, all of those transactions are on a public ledger. So now let's move on to a permissioned public blockchain. So the 2 examples that I have are EOS and Steem. I'm actually really good friends with the guys over at EOS Detroit, really cool bunch of guys. But we actually get into different types of arguments about which one is better, which is sort of ironic. But we're always in like the idea of trying to, I guess, bring value to the world, whether it's them or us or pretty much anyone else. But the idea behind a permissioned public blockchain is to become a validator or a miner within that network, you have to be given permission. So in the case of EOS or Steem, they have between 20 and 30 delegates who are voted in, whether it's from the network of people voting them in, or they vote themselves in because they have a lot of value within that network. And they can then become validators and be able to execute transactions. So they can obviously be paid for that. So what's the difference between a permissioned and permissionless? So there's I guess you can consider it a drawback, or obviously pros and cons between the two. With a permissionless public blockchain, you're going to have far more decentralization. So it's much, much more difficult to hack into that blockchain. It's much more secure. But there is a drawback. There is less scalability. So scalability means the ability to make transactions on that blockchain. So when you're dealing with a permissioned public blockchain, the transactions per second or the scalability of those blockchains are much higher. But you have a lot less decentralization. So you have to essentially trust all of the validators or people that are voted into power to be good actors within that system. And then we have a permissionless private blockchain. Believe it or not, LTO Network is the only one out there that has built one. It was built about, I guess, 9 months ago. I actually know the founders of the project, and they're doing some really cool stuff with what they're doing. It's essentially a hybrid blockchain. So it's a new word for you. So a hybrid blockchain. Yes, it's all new. So a hybrid blockchain means that they can have essentially 2 blockchains functioning within their network. So they have this permissionless private blockchain. So let's first start about what does that mean. So a permissionless private blockchain means that previously you can, as I mentioned with a permissionless public blockchain, anyone can be a part of that network. So anyone can go and validate transactions. They can be part of that network. But the private part, so it's a permissionless private blockchain, when you're saying it is private, that means that the transactions, all of the data and information is not stored publicly. Those blocks on this private blockchain are anchored to a public blockchain, so they can be validated through a permissionless public blockchain. So what that means is they're able to go and work on these distributed workflows. So it's different types of financial documents, different types of private information that they don't really want to be out there because it's GDPR compliant and it allows them to communicate on different things on a private level. So now we have the permissioned private blockchains. In these two examples, we have Corda and Hyperledger. And ironically enough, those are some of the competitors for my company and what we're building. And these are essentially the enterprise blockchain solutions. They're known as enterprise blockchain solutions because these are the platforms that many of the enterprises are currently using for blockchain. And a permissioned private blockchain is not necessarily much different than a database. So many of you guys have, the lady over there who was talking about how she is, was it in IT?
No, just I'm a process person.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. So when you're dealing with, I guess, any type of server information, it is all stored on a central database. So that is essentially how you are dealing with when it comes to a permissioned private blockchain. Obviously, it is very scalable. None of the information on that blockchain is public, but it's also very expensive to use.
So the permissioned private blockchain, if it's a central database, how's that different than traditional authentication methodologies?
It's not necessarily much different.
So what makes it blockchain? Because I thought blockchain is the distributed ledger
I can't hear
concept.
a question, can you
Oh,
maybe
sure.
speak up?
I thought, that's the first time ever anyone's asked me to speak up. Yeah, I know, I'm facing the wrong way. How is that different than traditional authentication methodology where you have to go to a central point to get authenticated? Because I thought Bitcoin was all about the distributed ledger and authentication.
Correct.
Question number 2, are these all cryptocurrencies or are they blockchain technologies?
So, Corda and So, to your first question, which hopefully I can remember, can you remind me again?
How is the centralized database different, why is that considered blockchain?
So, when you're talking about a blockchain, it doesn't actually have to be a distributed database. So, when you're talking about a public blockchain, yes, it is a distributed ledger. When you're talking about just a blockchain in general, it is just a ledger of information that is interconnected. So it doesn't have to be public.
Okay.
So that is sort of the difference. So all of the ones that are not permissioned private blockchains, so Bitcoin, Ethereum, Hydro, EOS, Steem, LTO, those are all operating as digital currency blockchain networks. So it allows for people to send funds from, or just value or data or information from one point to the other, or to be able to use a blockchain. I knew that was going to happen. And then to your second question, can you remind me again?
Yeah. Are those all cryptocurrencies or are they blockchain technologies?
Sure. So when you're talking about whether they are cryptocurrencies or whether they are blockchain, there is obviously a big difference. When you're looking at a blockchain explorer, so if you're looking at the Bitcoin blockchain, that is a blockchain. When you're looking at just the Bitcoin as a currency, that is a cryptocurrency. So for example, these are all blockchains, but they have cryptocurrencies and they have digital currencies that operate as a means of whether it's for payments or pretty much any other type of utility or value within those blockchains. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How many cryptocurrencies exist in today's world?
God, a lot. Wait. Oh, so she asked how many cryptocurrencies are there right now? A lot more than there needs to be. I believe there's probably somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000. It's insane. There's a ridiculous amount. And
It's worse than regular currency in today's world, so the volume is higher. So.
yeah, and the really weird part is a lot of people believe, and this isn't really my personal viewpoint, but there's different people that believe that all of them will probably end up being used. I have no clue. I'm not really here to try and understand that, but yeah.
Let me ask you, I'm getting that idea of that smart contract. I actually like this idea, this is what this is. Let me just give you an example of what I think. Are you saying that, let's say I have people in, let's say a country in Africa, I need somebody to cut the lawn 10 times in Africa, a country, like some piece of land in Africa.
Correct.
And you're saying this smart contract, I set this contract up with this person, let's say, and after they cut this 10 times, and somebody can verify that cutting of the lawn, that's when the smart contract I might set it to pay that person.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to go and travel to Africa
Correct.
to go see if that person mowed that lawn.
Yeah.
So that's the major purpose of this, or?
I mean, that's a use of it.
And it makes it great, I mean, that's a great use, okay, very nice.
So then, sorry, I'm so excited about the question. Does that mean that companies can start to automate auditing
Yes.
Yeah.
of transactions?
Yes.
Our company's doing it in a major way.
Yeah,
Oh, really?
that's RPA.
Yeah.
You wanna talk a little bit about
No, I'll talk later.
Okay.
Let him finish.
it? Okay.
Yeah, so when you're dealing with anything around a smart contract, you can essentially automate any type of process that you would have to do manually. That's the idea behind it. So anything that you have to do on a manual basis where you have to click a button, you don't really have to do that anymore. Obviously, you do have to be able to code that smart contract
Yeah.
to be able to automate that, but that is something that you can do.
So where is it that fraud could occur in these type of transactions?
Can you say that again?
Where is it that fraud could occur in these type of transactions?
The flaw?
Fraud.
Who's gonna verify that person mowed that lawn 10 times? I mean, that's the purpose of it, right? Somebody's verifying this for me, I don't gotta go over there. So
Correct.
can people fraudulently verify that? Can that person who mowed that lawn have?
Sure. So that's sort of where the idea behind reputation comes in. And that's sort of behind the idea of the identity layer, which is everything that my team is building. So we're building everything around identity-driven payments. So you can have pretty much any type of identity, whether it's your passport, driver's license, all of these different types of information, tie that to your digital identity. So pretty much any type of interaction that you're making in the real world can be tied to that. So let's say, for example, you're saying, all right, I'm mowing the lawn 5 times, and you find out, all right, this piece of crap isn't mowing the lawn. This is annoying. All right, that will hurt his reputation, and all of that information will be validated across the entire network that he is interacting with. So every single person knows that this guy is not something you want to interact with.
Think of it as Lyft in a bigger way.
Yeah, so he just said, think of it as Lyft. So if you're, I don't know, like, I was just an undergrad, and everyone's like, oh yeah, I got a 5-star rating on Uber and Lyft. I'm a great person. Everyone loves to drive me when I'm drunk. No, it's sort of the same thing when you're dealing with different types of transactions and payments within a digital network. You're able to have this reputation be shared across every different type of application or solution that you're interacting with. Does that sort of make sense?
Is that a smart contract?
Yep. I think she just stepped in to say we need
Oh, I
to move forward.
Move forward? All right. Sorry.
Who's controlling that verification process?
Everybody. People.
So when people, if they're angry or they're mad, I can see on the line now, if they have a bad situation with somebody, they can go on and do a bad review of somebody, it can be totally inaccurate.
Yes, and that's where the arbitration process can come in. There's people that are trying to do that. There's all these different kinds of things that come into play.
Let's create another platform for issues, but okay.
Pretty much. They're just it's essentially trying to solve solutions for problems. So the next one is called consensus and consensus mechanisms. So you can think about this as like the checks and balances of how like a government functions. So whether you like them or not, the government has rules and laws that they have to abide by. Whether they do or not, that's not really up to us to decide. And these different types of blockchain networks have consensus mechanisms with how they function. Some of the 3 main ones are proof of work, proof of stake, and delegated proof of stake. Proof of work is the most widely used consensus mechanism, and sort of tied into what you had mentioned with how you can try to steal money from a transaction. And these types of consensus mechanisms allow good actors within a system to be rewarded and bad actors within a system to not get a reward. So when you're using this computing power and you are verifying data or information or a transaction, you are able to be rewarded. And you're doing that through your time and energy, whether it's just computing power or things like that. And some of the main proof of work blockchain networks out there are Bitcoin and Ethereum. Those are the permissionless public blockchains. And then we have proof of stake. This has been an interesting topic with how it comes into play, because the whole idea behind whether mining and using computing power is actually good for the environment. And there have been a lot of discussions about how bad it is for the environment. I'm not really here to try and discuss that, but proof of stake has been this idea that has been introduced to sort of prevent that, where people are able to stake. So they put money into a smart contract that allows them to then be able to validate transactions and be a part of a network. So they don't actually have to use computing power. So this is one of the ideas that Ethereum is currently working on. So Ethereum currently functions as a proof of work blockchain. So that is the consensus mechanism that they currently use. And they are currently trying to move into using a proof of stake blockchain, which is obviously more efficient. And then we have delegated proof of stake. So two of the blockchains that I mentioned previously, EOS and Steem, they operate as delegated proof of stake. And as you can probably imagine, you have different types of delegates that are voted in to execute these transactions. So it's similar to how you can function in a government where we have like these law-abiding officers that are voted into power, and they create all the different types of rules. And these people within these delegated proof of stake blockchains, they are essentially voted in, whether they vote themselves in because they have a lot of value within the network, or different things like that, and allow them to then go and execute transactions. So proof of work and proof of stake are typically far more decentralized. They actually have a little bit less scalability than delegated proof of stake. So delegated proof of stake is typically much higher in terms of transactions per second and scalability, but they do obviously lack in terms of decentralization. So you have to essentially trust all of the actors within that system. So we've talked a little bit about protocols or actually how a blockchain works and the functions within a blockchain. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the protocol and the application layer. So you have this underlying blockchain, it's literally just data, and now we can figure out how you can actually use this blockchain on a protocol or an application layer. So in previous iterations of the internet or different types of applications, they were built on HTTPS, ICP, and TCP. So those are the, I guess, Web 1.0 and Web 2.0 protocols for building different types of applications. Some of those that you're probably familiar with are Amazon, Facebook, Google, eBay, all of these different types of solutions that are built on what's called like an internet stack. And all of the value that is captured within those applications is done at the application level. So the protocol level allows you to build these different types of solutions, but doesn't really hold much value. Now, when you come into a blockchain stack, it sort of flips. So the protocol layer is actually what holds all of the value. So where you're able to go and create these different types of products. So some of the protocols, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, EOS, Hydro, 0x, Stellar, these are all different types of protocols that allow you to build applications. So you can think of why a protocol is able to gain so much value is because it encapsulates all of the value from all of the different applications that are built on top of it. So can you imagine what type of value would be generated if Apple, Facebook, Google, Amazon, all of these different types of solutions or companies are all built on the same protocol. That value from all of those applications would be generated at the protocol level rather than at the application level. So that value is generated because of trust and reliability to that protocol. And then you can obviously build different types of solutions on top of those protocols. Some examples of that are Coinbase, Gemini, HydroPay, some of the solutions that we're building, and some of the other solutions that other companies are building. And when you're looking at an example of a blockchain-based application, the goal is to really not let you realize that you're using blockchain, because as many of you guys probably realize, you're not very familiar with blockchain, and you don't really want people to be familiar with it. It's similar to when you're using a credit card. When you're going and paying someone with a credit card, do you really know how the payment's going through? Probably 99% of people don't. So that's the whole idea behind a blockchain-based application. You're having blockchain operating in the background, storing and holding all the transactions and data within that solution. So on the left-hand side, we have a picture of a solution called Steemit. And this is a product that was built on top of the Steem blockchain that allows for different types of content creators or people who are musicians, blog writers, things like that, to write content and actually be rewarded for it. So people can pay you or tip them in digital currency. And then on the right-hand side, this is actually a solution that my team built, which is called HydroPay. Believe it or not, it's a payment application. And quick question, how many of you guys deal with NGOs or international clients? All right, so this is sort of the idea behind how blockchain can be useful for people that you are dealing with who are overseas. One of the big ideas behind blockchain is what it can do for remittance payments and sending money from one person to the next. So different types of crypto to fiat or fiat to fiat transactions. And this is a product that we actually built out that allows you to send different types of fiat transactions, so USD to Euro, USD to the Nigerian Naira, to Mexican Peso, all of these different types of fiat currencies, all under 1%. So it's a little bit, I would consider it a little bit cheaper than wire transfers or bank transfers. So talk a little bit about protocols, applications, how it can function, but as many of you guys are accountants, you want to see how it can be applied to you guys in your day-to-day life. So one of the things that I've talked about is auditing. So you can actually audit a blockchain. And a little-known company, I'm saying that a little bit sarcastically, is Ernst & Young. And they released a solution about 18 months ago called a Blockchain Analyzer. And what this does is it analyzes different types of transactions and is able to identify outliers within a data set. So this is obviously very beneficial when you're going and reviewing different types of transactions within your company. And this kind of ties into robotic process automation. So this is one of the big hot topics for accounting right now, and how it can be used to automate auditing processes. And this can essentially be used as a bridge between legacy systems as well as blockchain systems, because obviously you don't need blockchain for everything. There's many different types of solutions that don't need it. Anybody who says that blockchain is here to save the world and everything is better with it, they're wrong. It's not going to be used for everything. There are different types of solutions where it is efficient and it is proven to be cost efficient, but you don't want to be using it in every type of situation. But there needs to be a bridge between these legacy systems and blockchain systems to be able to analyze and review some of these transactions. And that is sort of where this AI and ML idea comes into play. And as many of you guys are accountants, this is a pretty, I guess I would consider it a growing industry for a niche that you can get into to actually increase your revenue and be able to target different types of clientele. And that is different types of cryptocurrency investors, traders, or people who are getting into this industry. And believe it or not, 92% of all of the profits and traders or trades, I should say, were not properly calculated in the year of 2018. And this was a research article that was done by an organization named Blocks. And believe it or not, I am one of those 92% because I have honestly no clue how to do it. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a CPA. And many of the people in this industry are not either, because all of the systems that are being built are just being built to be used. They were not built with all of the back-end infrastructure for accounting and all of the software required to record all of this type of information and the software to figure out, okay, how much do you have to pay for this transaction, how much do you have to pay for this trade, all of these different types of things. And they still don't really know at the government level how to deal with this stuff.
So this isn't necessarily a question for you, but does anyone know if the FASB is starting to look at blockchain? They are?
Yeah, because it's a big topic. Gains and losses is huge.
Sorry.
Gains and losses in blockchain is mostly individuals, but it's becoming associated with businesses, and the government wants to know how much you made, right? And
One thing leads to another. Yeah.
Government always wants their extra penny. So, obviously with all of this type of information, I know many of you guys are working in different types of industries and firms and things like that. And believe it or not, there are different types of industries that can be impacted by what blockchain can offer and what this ledger is able to do. I already mentioned a little bit about artificial intelligence, AI and ML, with how that can be beneficial with auditing different types of transactions. I don't know if you guys are familiar with IoT and what that is. IoT stands for Internet of Things. This is starting to become a little bit more of a hot topic right now, as pretty much everybody is using a smartphone or a tablet or pretty much any type of device that is connected to the internet. That is considered an IoT device. And so you're probably thinking, all right, why is blockchain useful? Well, you're able to have different types of devices communicate with one another, because if they are connected to the internet, they can be connected to a ledger of data that is able to transfer information from one place to another. So you're able to have different types of IoT devices and actually create what is called a smart city. One of my team members is
Smart what? City?
Smart City.
Like
So,
Sim City?
like a city, like a town.
Yeah.
So you can think of an entire city, so every single internet-connected device is able to communicate with one another. So right now, when you're dealing with different types of systems, they are connected all to a central server. All the information that is stored on a central server. And those servers are not able to communicate with one another. There is different types of information that should be communicated, with how many people are going into a place, how much, like, for example, if you are taking the temperature of your house, that information that's data, that's very valuable information. And the amount of electricity that is required to make that house be that temperature, all that information can be shared through a ledger. And if you're able to have an entire city being able to do that, you're able to save a lot more money. You're able to save money with travel and things like that. So you can see where every device is at all times. Obviously, there are different types of privacy things that come into play with that, but that's for another day. And then financial services. I talked a lot about payments and what that can do. And one of the hot topics right now is DeFi, and that is, to be perfectly honest, that is what I'm most passionate about, and what DeFi, which is decentralized finance, and what that can enable for not only people in the world, but believe it or not, people in the United States. About 25% of people in the US are underbanked. So that means that they pay exorbitant fees for access to different types of financial services. And there are people in different parts of the world who don't even have access to whether it's banking or different types of financial services, or they obviously pay a lot of fees to be able to use those systems. And these are types of solutions that are able to be built out that allow for people to be able to save their money and be able to use more of it for other things. as I mentioned, with real estate and how you can allow for different types of properties to be transacted in different forms and fashions. Supply chain management and logistics. So I don't know how many of you guys have to take medicine or have to take, that's the next one. Actually, supply chain management, yeah. So I don't know how many of you guys actually have to take medicine, but this isn't really a prevalent issue here in the United States, but in many countries like Africa, they have a lot of issues with fraudulent and fake pharmaceutical medicines, and it causes a lot of deaths every single year. And the issue with that is you are not able to verify the medicine that is going from where it is created in a laboratory to then being able to be used by the end user. And you are able to track using this ledger where it has gone at every single part of the supply chain from where it was created all the way to the end point where it is being then used. So you can verify if this is a product that was created for me that I'm supposed to be taking, or it was added into the supply chain at some point and is fake. So it's not legitimate medicine, which
They're
is
starting to use that in the food business too. In the food business too.
correct.
It's
So-
also very prevalent in aviation components,
Right.
where there are fraudulent, axles for a Boeing 747.
Correct.
And you don't want to put a fake one on and find out when you land.
Yes, and Walmart actually started. They're building out on Hyperledger, which is one of the permissioned private blockchains, and they're building out a supply chain solution. I believe it was supposed to go live sometime this year. I don't know if it did or not, but they are allowing for these types of things to be tracked from point A to the end user. And then we have healthcare, so you can actually own the medical information that you have received when you're going to the hospital or getting blood work. So, for example, when you go and get blood work, you don't actually have ownership of that blood work. It's the person that you're, or I guess the organization that you're going to get the blood work from, whether, I'm blanking on the two organizations. Yeah, Quest and LabCorp. So they actually own all of that blood work, and you actually have to get access to that, and you have to actually ask that you can get access to that. And if you previously don't, it's very, very difficult to get access to that. And then when you want to go and send that information over to other doctors, you have to be able to get verification from those doctors to send it to the other doctor, and it can be a very painstaking process. And then obviously with legal, as I mentioned, you can have different types of notaries with escrow payments and being able to receive a payment after you are completing a service. Then you have governance. So as I mentioned, with consensus mechanisms, you're able to create different types of voting systems. We're starting to explore building out a voting pilot, so you can actually vote using a blockchain. So all of the votes are recorded on a public ledger, so they can all be recorded and audited, so you don't have anybody faking any types of votes, and you can see instantly where those votes are being allocated to, so they don't actually have to be manually recorded. And then content creation and arts. As I mentioned previously with that platform called Steemit, you're able to be rewarded by being able and going to create different types of content and be rewarded for it. Because I know a lot of the different platforms out there, whether it's YouTube, SoundCloud, Apple, they all take a fairly significant chunk out of the producer of that content for themselves. And this is one of those solutions that allows for people to be rewarded on a much higher level than they were previously. And yeah, so that's pretty much all I have for you guys today. I hope I was able to teach you guys a little bit. And I'll be sticking around for a little bit, so if you guys have any questions or anything.
Where's your company based at?
We're actually based out of the Cayman Islands. So,
Of course.
so I personally work between, I'm either in the DC area or out of the Detroit area. And I have team members who are literally spread all over the globe. And since our organization is primarily based using cryptocurrency or digital currencies, we didn't want to be. Yes, and that's why we're there. Because obviously if you're based in the US, the transactions for types of digital currencies is not really understood, and you're taxed very heavily, so you can actually get away from all of those using different types of, or being incorporated in other countries. But yeah, thank you guys for your time, and Bill, thank you for having me out here.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing your questions.